This image was taken by surveillance 10 hours ago on the edge of the solar system.
Apokolips phased into our dimension and released stealth drones, then phased out again.
This can only be looked at as a prelude to war.
Well, I think, like, all the stories and myth and mythology and religion even, there's heroes and there's villains.
I want to make this perfectly clear. We are facing an existential threat to the planet.
The hero is challenged by some failing.
With our combined force, we can cut through them. Then I'll do what needs to be done.
There's fallen angels. There's characters who start out one way and then something happens and changes their path, and then they go down a darker road. There's the idea of redemption, someone making a mistake and then having to make it right. In Justice League Dark, Apokolips War, and Darkseid is the devil in this. He is evil incarnate. He represents the result of Superman's hubris. And actually, Flash's hubris too, because Flashpoint creates the portal that basically allows Darkseid to enter our world and to enter this universe.
When you see stories about characters like Superman and Darkseid, you're seeing big stories, important stories, and important stories go to every ounce of our being, because we all have dreads of certain big things happening and big catastrophes and doomsday ahead of us.
He doesn't, I don't think, even consider a morality about him. Seems to be just morally absent, if anything, which truly makes him terrifying, I think, and an incredible villain to work with.
There is no shred of humanity in him. His goal, seriously, honestly, is the subjugation of free will in the universe. It does not get more evil than that. You read a story with Darkseid and you think, the Justice League might not come out on top.
No!
Damien! I love you, Clark.
When Jack was working for Marvel on Fantastic Four and Thor and all those other books, he was frustrated that he did not have complete control over the stories that he was plotting and figuring out and writing to some extent. So he really much wanted to do epic stories, but he felt to do epic stories, he had to have some control of where the epic was heading. When he had the opportunity to create something for DC Comics, he said, we've got to do a new generation. We've got to do comics in the 70s that we wouldn't have done in the 60s, because the 70s are going to be about young people taking over and displacing the old. So that was essentially the impetus for the whole New Gods series.
You are one of the so-called New Gods.
At that point, a lot of new people were coming into the comic book business. And he was looking at the news, and there were a lot of young people now speaking out against the war in Vietnam and other injustices. And he felt a period of transition was coming in this world, where the younger people were going to be taking over and displacing the older people. And in the comic book business, he had no problem with that. He understood that there'd be new artists and new writers moving in. And unlike a lot of people doing comics at that time, he did not feel threatened by them. He encouraged them.
Jack Kirby, when asked about the creation of the New Gods and so many of his iconic comic book characters, he talked about going to some real original sources, to biblical sources, to going to those kinds of stories and parables and myths and all that stuff, and thinking to himself, okay, well, this group of people had their gods, and this group of people have their gods. Who are our gods?
I am Diana of Themyscira, daughter of Hippolyta. I follow the old gods, and will never again bow to the new.
I think as an audience, we like to watch stories about good versus evil with super beings to some degree, like either gods, superheroes. And I think a lot of that comes from the archetypes that a lot of comic books have. Like you have a lot of the hero's journey sort of stories. You see a hero try to overcome something and having a physical being be that force they go up against.
I still remember seeing Darkseid, I think in his first animated appearance in the Superpowers cartoon show, like back in like the early 80s, and I was just blown away. I was like, who is this guy? You know, I've never heard of him. I thought he had a cool name, and then the Omega Beam shooting out his eyes. And then I would discover more about him in the comic. It just continued to just escalate in terms of my interest with him.
Darkseid incorporated everything that Jack disliked in villains and people he thought were villains. At the time, we used to have these long discussions about Richard Nixon, who was one of the main villains in America at the time. And Jack disliked Nixon intensely. He was very hard on entrepreneurs and businessmen and tycoons who he thought were trying to oppress the little people a lot, who just couldn't get enough money in the world, and they had to take from the people who were just barely getting by. And Darkseid was the embodiment of everything that Jack was angry at, pretty much.
So many of Jack Kirby's comic book creations from across the multiverse, from different comic book companies, have effectively remained the same in their design to this day, because it's such a strong design.
It's really funny, actually, with Darkseid's design. When you start with Jack Kirby's design, it's like so classic. It's just the silhouette of him is usually the first thing I always think of, is that he always just looks like he's been sculpted from a mountain. And then he's got that kind of granite face and everything. It just continues to give that kind of stone creature, you know, appearance. Then you add the red, you know, glowing eyes, which, you know, can fire death to anybody and things. It's just, he's just a nightmare.
The thing I love most about his design in this movie is just how massive and solid looking he looks. Where he looks like he's made out of rock. The way we did the armor, he looks like a warrior. Like he can take the fight to anyone he wants to conquer.
I always envision Apokolips as just a giant factory. And even Kirby kind of envisioned it that way, where from space you see Apokolips and it looks like it's got smokestacks stuck all over it. You know, there's fire pits, and there's like an industrial vibe to the whole planet, because it feels like it's more built planet as opposed to an actual terrestrial planet. It feels like it's made of steel and stone, and like it was assembled. Kirby's more like a lot of gears, a lot of machinery. His stuff is super sci-fi and very complicated. It's got a lot of design elements in it, and it's very intricate. And then our version of Apokolips is a little more stripped back, a little more clean lines, a little more, lack of a better word, minimal. As far as the design, you know, Phil Barras, the designer, would put a few Kirbyisms in some of the design work, but overall it was pretty much going more from a Jim Lee anime standpoint on our design aesthetic.
There's no blue skies on, you know, Apokolips. It just looks like a nightmare come to life. We were really pulling away as much comfort as we could for the audience. We wanted to make them feel as uncomfortable as they possibly could.
I am entropy. I am death.
He is the leader of an entire planet, an empire too. He's constantly expanding, but he's expanding the same way that conquerors in the past have expanded. Like even Alexander the Great, he conquered huge amounts of land. He had to fight people, he killed people, he took over their regions. And Darkseid's doing the same thing.
After all, a conqueror must conquer.
In his mind, he's conquered all the planets in his dimension, and that one little mud blob planet, Earth, is the outlier, and he's not happy with having everything else. He wants that one little planet because he can't stand the fact that there's one place that doesn't follow him and do his bidding.
Any type of military conqueror needs to be able to strategize against his enemies. And Darkseid has the advantage of being able to tap into the technology in other worlds. So there's nothing hidden from him.
With the Furies and his elite guard off-world, and only parademons to guard him, Darkseid will be vulnerable to attack.
I think he would not consider himself either good or evil. I think all he thinks about is just what he can consume, what he can use for his own ambition, and if it's not something he can use, if it doesn't help his ambition, then it's probably something that he feels is a threat or something that he wants to eliminate.
I don't think he thinks about it as good and evil. I think that he thinks about it in terms of, I'm right and everything else is wrong. My way of thinking, my belief system is correct. I learned that this thing exists, the anti-life equation. And it is the most logical and important thing that I could do as a being is to chase that down and to get it, because what else is there? Because it doesn't make any sense that there would be something like free will. That's, you know, and to me it seems as though it's not him doing the universe any kind of service in the name of good, but it's just him doing the thing that needs to happen and what he believes to be right.
Soon Earth will be christened by Darkseid as New Apokolips.
In a way, Darkseid can be a hero in his story because he's bringing his type of order to the universe. But he's doing it in a way that hurts billions of people and destroying worlds.
The rest of us didn't last much longer.
It doesn't scan like a bomb, more like an alien computer.
Alien?
My business is ensuring that Darkseid's vision is executed so his reign spreads to every corner of the galaxy.
Jack loved new technology, and there was a lot of it in the early 70s. But he recognized that when you invent new things that make the world better, you simultaneously invent new things that make the world worse. That someone will take everything that comes along and think, how can I use this to control other people? How can I use this to better myself at the expense of others? He was very wary about that.
Those great sci-fi concepts like the Mobius chair or the mother box is another great sort of Darkseid, staple. I think what they add to the stories that we experience are that they sort of put themselves above good versus evil. And the Mobius chair, when a character sits in that, is just so technologically advanced and so overpowering that it feels as though it sort of transcends any notion of like humanity or emotional thought, which is scary because it can be good or evil.
Jack Kirby was one of the few people I've ever seen have the word visionary applied to them who deserved it. Jack could see things happening. Everybody's walking around with a mother box now in their pockets. They call it an iPhone or an Android, but it's a mother box. It's amazing how many things that happen in this world today you can find antecedents for in a Jack Kirby comic.
Another great purpose that the character of Darkseid serves is that he makes every hero an underdog. He makes every villain an underdog because it seems like such insurmountable odds for these characters to be able to defeat Darkseid that I think that it just adds those immediate stakes.
And I think that's inspiring. I actually think that people, when they see that kind of stuff, they'll, hopefully draw out for themselves something that they feel they can take on whatever kind of monster they're facing. There's still hope out there. You can still do it.
In a world where you've got a Darkseid who will kill you, we always have to be on the defensive and to realize what is the enemy. And the enemy is not necessarily one person. It's a concept, it's a mindset. It's not enough to defeat a Darkseid. You've got to defeat that way of thinking. And the next guy who comes along thinks that way. Darkseid was a villain for dramatic effect, but he encapsulated all the forces out there that Jack felt were destructive to the human spirit and to mankind.